everyone. Welcome to Talks at Google. My name is Sarah Asmaro, and today I'm delighted to be welcoming thought leader and Wall Street Journal's best-selling author of The Power of Wonder, Monica Parker, to our conversation. Monica, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm very excited to be diving into this book. I had such a pleasure reading it. So let's get started. You define wonder as the magical, yet little understood human emotion, both a journey and a destination. Tell us what listeners need to know about you to understand why you chose to write a book about the power of wonder.
Sure. So, and thank you very much for saying that about the book. It has been a passion project for me. Took a bit of a dog-legged journey to end up deciding to write a book about wonder. I studied design in undergrad and then went on to move overseas to study organizational behavior. But in between, I took a bit of a dog-legged journey, and I was a homicide investigator for the Department of Justice. I work with men and women on Florida's death row, as you do. And through each one of these stages in my life, from working with people on death row, from working with families with children with disabilities, and working even in the corporate environment, I became really interested in how people manage existential change. So big change, not little change, not a new program or something like that, but losing your job or losing your life at the hands of the government, and how it is that people were able to manage that. So I really set about to write a book about change management, which in retrospect would have been probably freaking boring. And I'm glad I didn't write that. But what I started to recognize from my own experience and then from the research is that people who hold their world with a great deal of wonder really are more buoyant. They're more resilient and able to withstand these big existential changes. And so I sort of fell down this wonder rabbit hole. And 4 years later, we have The Power of Wonder. And so that's really what brought me to the topic.
I love that you said that, and there's a clear reflection to your experience outside of an author to what you were able to bring to this book. And what I found most meaningful is the call out of how the undercurrent of our society, we've moved away from this lust of wonder and curiosity, almost both intentionally and somewhat actively. Is that the case? Are we moving away from the state of wonder? Is that what you've seen over the years?
I think that there are I think as humans, we always crave it. And that's one of the points that I want to make in the book is that wonder, when you start to describe it to people, there's no one that doesn't know what you're talking about because we all know it. It's very primal and primary to who we are. But I believe that systems that we exist within are sort of trying to erase our drive towards wonder and our desire to have it in our life. We start from, babies are wonder machines. They're just these little wonder factories and absorbing all the time. And you can see it's almost like they're tripping all the time. They have these faces as they're absorbing everything. But then pretty much as soon as they enter in the school system, it becomes about what kind of expectations they're trying to meet, what kind of competition they are with one another. And this idea that we are always seeking the single right answer. And in that single right answer, then we become very rigid and then very intolerant, and rigidity and intolerance and wanting to find the single right answer as children. Then that means that's what we seek as adults. And those are all really contrary to wonder. So what I would say is that and then we get into, of course, our technology and the way that our technology really tries to inspire us towards only surface curiosity as opposed to deep curiosity. And technology also doesn't allow us to have time for daydreaming, for slow thought. And so I think that it's more systems within which we exist that are doing a really fine job of sort of killing wonder, rather than it being necessarily anything that we're evolving away from. So I think that we just have to create a concerted wonder practice in order to stay attuned to a wonder mindset.
Well, let's break that down a little bit. You actually break down the elements of wonder within the book as watch, wandering, whittle, woe, and woe. I'd love if you could take us through that journey a little bit.
Sure. So the way that I describe wonder, because wonder is something of a shapeshifter, right? It's both a noun and a verb. So we talk about to wonder, which is curiosity, or to experience a wonder, which would really be sort of the outcome of awe. And I wanted to link these into one, what I call an emotional experience. So it starts with openness to experience, which is a personality trait, something that's generally set with us, half from our nature, from our genetics, and the other from nurture by the time we're about 25. And then that moves into curiosity, which can be both a state and a trait. We have a tendency towards curiosity, but also curiosity can be inspired by what we experience. Then that moves into absorption and presence, where we really, again, whittle back our distractions and the noise that keeps us from paying attention. And then that gets into the last stage, which is awe. And I describe as you say, watch, wander, whittle, wow, and woe. And the reason that I use wow and woe for awe is because awe really has sort of two states. The first is the wow, where we experience something that is so vast that strikes us in such a way that we feel like a smaller component part of a bigger system. And then the woe, where we're actually changed by that experience. Our schema, the way that our brain processes information, the lens through which we see the world is changed, and sometimes forever. And so that watch, wander, whittle, wow, and woe is really this arc. And it almost becomes, I describe it in the book also as a cycle, because the more that we experience it, the more likely we are to experience it. And it always becomes this additive upward cycle. And so I think that even if if we're not always rewarded with that awe moment at the end, just putting ourselves forward, trying to create opportunities for the watch, wander, and whittle, will get us closer to that aha moment at the end.
So I'm curious, just based on your experience, both in the past life and throughout writing this book, where have you seen most people get stuck or lose that extra nudge to bring themselves back into a state of wonder?
I think I would say there's probably a few. So the first is and it's one of the reasons why I really wanted to make a point that this is a cycle and that there are stages. I think sometimes people are waiting for the aha thing to happen to them and assume that it has to be big, right? And even the researchers who first started looking at awe thought that it had to be rare and fleeting. Those were the words that they used. But the more and more research that comes out, we know that actually wonder can be found in the quotidian. So I would say that the first is that people are looking for that big thing and think that it has to sort of smack them across the face rather than looking for the details. So I would say that that's probably the first bit. The other is the presence piece, that the whittle. It's really hard for us in this life that is so noisy. It's just I'm in New York right now, and there's just so much everywhere. There's so much visual information, so much audio information, so many people, so much technology that's always sort of this onslaught, that if we don't pare that back and become absorbed, then it becomes very difficult for us to have that awe moment. And so I would say that those are probably two of the pieces where we get stuck the most. Also recognizing that as we age, we believe that there's less for us to be curious about. And so we become less curious over time. So I would say that those of us that are, 50 and above, maybe we think we've seen it all. And that's really sort of can be a sticking point as well.
Why is that? Why do we lose that sense of desire for wanting more with age?
So what happens is as our brain, it's building blocks, basically our schema. It's what Piaget called our schema. These are the building blocks that are developed over time that inform how we react. And over time, those building blocks become almost ruts in our brain, right? They become crutches in a sense, and it's a very efficient way for us to operate, right? We notice newness, and then once our brain says, "Oh, that's not new anymore," we put it into a box and we move on. And this is efficient. It helps us, pare back all of this chaos that we have in our life. If we were to notice everything, then it would be overwhelming. But what happens as we get older is that we have so many schema and we have so many shortcuts to assuming we understand it, that we sort of stop seeing the newness because we've seen enough that our brain is able to associate what we experience and say, yeah, yeah, I've seen that already. And so really it's about trying to remind our brain, no, there is newness to be found here. There is novelty that we can see. and then allowing ourselves to really notice that. And I think that noticing newness is one of the key ways that we can build a wonder practice. And it's something that's really effective and especially important as we get older.
And that's a psychological piece, right? It's like the reframe of, like, how we take a look at things. You also allude to it not just being psychological, the benefits of wonder, but also physiological and spiritual. Could you elaborate
Yes.
a bit more on that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's incredible. And one of the things that was the biggest eye opener for me when researching this was the quantum of physiological benefits. So what we know from the research that wonder lowers our blood pressure, it lowers our stress hormones, so it lowers cortisol, and it lowers our pro-inflammatory cytokines. And this is really interesting. Pro-inflammatory cytokines are the markers of an inflammation. And usually they are released when we're ill, right? So we're sick and pro inflammatory cytokines are released and they help us get better. But if they're released because of stress, then they actually make us sick. And these are the markers that are associated with things like heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's. And so the idea that these can reduce that wonder can reduce pro-inflammatory cytokines is incredible. And there's research being done specifically with people with PTSD, finding that it reduces the PTSD reactions and actually starts to change again physiologically our brains. We know that some of the behaviors that contribute towards wonder, like daydreaming, thickens the cerebral cortex and our gray matter, and that makes us more resilient and better able to manage stresses. And so the physiological benefits are really striking. And then, of course, we get into the spiritual, which in some ways probably people find is most natural to be able to connect. And one of the things that I sought when I wrote the book was to try to merge the science and the soul, so to speak, that people could see the religious and the spiritual connections, that they might have those moments where we feel that we are connecting to something more. Awe in and of itself, the final component element of wonder, is in itself a self-transcendent experience. And self-transcendent means to rise above our own corporal existence to connect to something greater. And so that's really that spiritual piece. And we can see it in religious texts as well. We see it in stories about Krishna and stories about Saul, who became Paul, and all of those different messages around how we experienced something that connected us to a higher power and made us see the world differently.
So what you're telling me is that wonder can help bring us more presence.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, it becomes additive. So the more that we focus on a presence practice, things that I call slow thought, so things like meditation, narrative journaling, nostalgia, gratitude, a gratitude practice, these are all things that help us slow down, but also that help us pare back our the chaos that's in our life and allow us to focus more. And that presence adds to our wonder and also brings us greater wonder.
I love that. Tell me a little bit more about the concept of wonder bringers. How do you go about identifying those activities that can bring about that spark?
Yeah, I mean, one of the best tricks or tips for deciding what is a wonder bringer is what gives you goosebumps or what gives you. I loved a description that they called tears of wonder joy. What makes those tears sort of spring to your eyes where you're like, oh God, I got a little verklempt. Why did that happen? Those are your wonder bringers. And what one of the things that I found really interesting, there's a piece of research around wonder walks. And what I found fascinating about the wonder walks was what made a wonder walk was you decided it is. So a lot of what our wonder bringers is simply we prime and decide that we will find wonder in a particular thing. But wonder bringers can fall into a lot of different categories. There are natural, and those tend to be most people find some natural wonder bringers because by our nature, the way that we have evolved through time as humans, we feel that sense of being small in the presence of big, wondrous natural environments. But we can also find them cognitively. I am a big nerd. I wear that mantle proudly. And so for me, like thinking about things like the nature of a folded universe or, a donut sized hole, black hole in the world, that's the kind of stuff that gives me a sense of wonder. But we can also get it socially. So that can be, watching our child take their first steps or even seeing, a charismatic speaker, and that can give us a sense of wonder. So I really encourage people to start understanding what their wonder bringers are and then discussing it with each other, because the more we talk about our wonder filled experiences, we actually relive them in the telling. And so I want people to start to use this language almost like a love language, to say, this is my wonder bringer, what's yours, so that we can connect with people. For me, again, another one is music, and I love being able to share that, and it becomes almost like a cognitive and a social element, because I'm sharing it in a large group as well. And so fellowship with other people in that context is a big wonder bringer for me.
So let's make this a little tactical. I wake up, I'm going about my day. How is it that I can gravitate myself to stop and slow down, be more present, and start seeing wonder? What does that look like for those tuning in?
Yep. So I would say the first thing I would do is to prime myself. There's all sorts of research going back decades that shows that when we write down our goals, we're more likely to achieve them. Why is that? Well, that's because we commit more cognitive energy towards things that we've told our brain there's a reward for. So we're saying, this is something I want. I want to be rewarded with this thing. And our brain will go, okay, I'll focus on that. So the first thing I would say is, well, decide that you're going to find wonder. Say, I'm going to find 3 things to have an experience of wonder about today. Then the other I would say is to try to inject some novelty. So do something new. Take a new route to work, walk to work a different way, listen to some new music. Even wearing your watch on a different wrist will reroute cognitive pathways in a way that it hadn't before. So really try to inject a little bit of newness. Um, be curious about people. So being open, when we talk about openness to experience, which is the first element of wonder, it's not just openness to experience, it's openness to new people and new ideas. So I would say, try to be curious and maybe have a conversation with a person you normally wouldn't, or with a person about a topic that you normally wouldn't. That's another great way to do that. And then perhaps at the end of your day, engage in some kind of wonder practice, slow thought practice. So that might be something like meditation, it might be narrative journaling, or maybe just writing down in a gratitude journal what you found that made you feel grateful.
You brought up people. What about our environment and the people that we surround ourselves with can enable wonder?
Absolutely. So I talk in the book about charisma, and when we're around charismatic people, that really can trigger a great sense of wonder in us. Now, we have to be cautious, because sometimes charisma is wielded as a weapon. We've seen a lot of politicians and people in leadership of corporate organizations who are very charismatic, but sort of use that for a little bit of a naughty way, in that we become very attracted to their charisma, and there is a sense of wonder. But in a positive way, the way that we can use people is to, again, surround ourselves with people that are charismatic. We can also surround ourselves with people who share our same wonder bringers, so that we feel compelled to share them with one another. And one of the things that I think is really fascinating also is that wonder can be used at work very effectively. So we know that people who experience wonder are more humble, they're more generous, they're more ethical. What's fascinating is not only are they more humble, but their friends see them as more humble. And so it actually radiates off of us. So I believe that if we enter our relationships and our friendships with a sense of wonder, that will draw others to us. And that is evidenced by the research that people who are higher in the composite components of wonder have more successful relationships at work and in home. And so, really, I believe that if we enter our relationships in a sense of wonder and use the language of wonder and wonder bringers, that will enhance our relationships and make us better friends, better leaders, better parents, better community members.
You spoke about work a bit, and then I believe in the book you also talk about the correlation between wonder and the boost of performance.
Mm.
And as a society, we're having these conversations about how do we cultivate balance while also working smarter. Tell me how we lean into wonder more to contribute towards a boost in performance.
Well, for starters, one of the things that I think is fascinating is that when we experience wonder, we are less stressed, time stressed. So there was a fascinating piece of research that showed that wonder made us feel like we had more time. And we always complain about not feeling like we have enough time. We feel so time pressured, even though statistically we actually have more time than we ever did before, but we're just filling it with so much more crap is the problem. But I think that if we are willing to make time for wonder, that will actually give us a sense that we have more time overall. And so that will certainly contribute to feeling more effective at work. What we also know is that when we are deeply curious, which is that second stage of wonder, we connect dots in a way that is very different than when we're surface curious. And that allows us to see problems and challenges in a much more holistic way, and to come up with and develop solutions that are much more innovative, in a more quickly, and I think in a more pleasant way, frankly. And then also, wonder makes us more tolerant, and it makes us more willing to see nuance and variance in people. And I think that one of the things that makes work so stressful is when we feel that we're not being heard or seen, and that people don't really want to understand us. So I believe that as leaders and as coworkers, if we try to find wonder with one another, that what that will allow us to do is to be more tolerant with one another, and that as an underpinning, as a foundation, would be so, so powerful.
And you also bring up how its effect on our health, like you touched on the stress factor. Tell me a little bit more about the research that you uncovered around the connection between wonder, stress, and then its contribution towards our health.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, we go back to that idea of the pro-inflammatory cytokines. Those are really are challenging for us physiologically when we are stressed, and they just start firing sort of willy-nilly. And it's what gives people, it's what leads to heart disease. It's some of the elements again that people believe contribute to Alzheimer's and well as well. And when we engage in a wonder practice, what that starts to do is help our vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve that we have in our body. It's called vagus. It's Latin for wandering, because it basically starts in our brainstem and goes all the way down the course of our body. And what we know is that the vagus nerve is part of what manages either the flight or fright, which we know about, or what's known as rest and digest, which is sort of the flip side. And what wonder helps us do is to tap into the rest and digest period when what we want to do is constantly be in fight or flight. And so, from a physiological point of view, it really helps us to relax, to lower our some of our, I guess, reactionary threshold, and to become much more present in a way that is not as reactionary, is not as stressful physically to our bodies. And then, of course, that radiates off of us, and people will then feel around us less stressed and feel that we're less reactive. And I think that that has a compound impact.
You know, you talked about the physiological and the psychological elements of wonder. What would you tell the managers in the room or the leaders in the room that oversee teams in terms of cultivating a space that allows for wonder and to be able to enable that for their teams?
What I would say, I think that we've been talking for a while, and a lot of organizations appreciate the importance of things like empathy. They appreciate the importance of things like active listening, genuinely listening to people and trying to understand their point of view. What's fascinating to me is that there's research that shows that wonder actually assists in communication from people who are lower in the organization up through management, because managers who engage in a wonder practice actually listen to the people that are under them in a more effective way. The other thing that I find is, as we start to try to build teams, we know the importance, right, of including diversity in teams. But there's a very natural reaction that we have, and it just exists because of how we are as humans, to in group and out group. It's why we always tend to hire people that are more like ourselves. But of course, Google were the ones that did Project Aristotle, which is one of the greatest pieces of research around innovation in teams. What Project Aristotle found was that it was diversity of thought and of different types of people in those groups that created innovation, but also giving people that sense of autonomy. Both of those can be found in wonder, because as we engage in a wonder practice, we widen our in groups. So rather than seeing in groups as people that are like ourselves, we see them as humanity. It starts to get that large. And when we see our in group is bigger than just people like ourselves, we're more likely to not just hire people like ourselves, but to help them feel truly included. And I think that that's one of the challenges. It's one thing to hire for diversity, but to actually get inclusion is very difficult, and Wonder can assist with that. And it's been fascinating because I've been deploying Wonder at Work programs. So it's basically training programs, everything from a half day to 6 units of how we can do this. And the feedback has been incredible. And in particular, leaders saying that they're finding that they are much more tolerant with different ideas, that they see more nuance than they did before, and that they're less rigid in their thinking.
So give us a sneak peek into Wander at the Workday, you said?
Yeah, Wonder at Work. And so
Wonder
Wonder at Work looks at things like authenticity, empathy, how we can use Wonder at Work in order to enhance ED&I and ESG initiatives, how it can impact positively ethics and ethical decision making and morality in the workplace, which is again, at the top of the news again, yet again, about how we can make more ethical decisions on behalf of people who depend on us. And then using that also to create more effective and efficient communication. And so it's just been really fascinating because I think that these are these are topics that people have been talking about, but to have them aggregated in such a way and then to see that there's really a single set of activities that will enhance that has been a real eye opener for the corporates that I'm working with.
On the same note as the corporate setting, what would it look like in a we're gonna bring very, like, practical terms. What would it look like in a room either with an entire group or one-on-one coaching to start to enable for managers to start to enable wonder and curiosity and that openness of dialogue with their
Mm.
teams?
I mean, there's just some really simple things that that some of my clients were doing even during COVID. You can Nostalgia is a great sort of way to break through some of the chaos of the day. So we would have people put as their screen background a picture from their childhood, and then we would ask people to explain, well, what was this picture? And that reflecting back in a nostalgic way triggers a lot of different elements. Again, it involves the vagus nerve. It's a mixed emotion. So when we have a mixed emotion, that's very powerful for resilience because we're remembering the positive, but also in some ways the negative of that moment. And to share that with other people, then you're getting the social piece. So that's a great way. Wonder walks, either as a group or a wonder walk that you take individually in between, say, marathon Zoom meetings that you have, and then coming back, or excuse me, Google Hangout meetings that you have, and then coming back and saying, what did I experience on my wonder walk, and sharing that. A real key piece of wonder is the expression of it afterwards and sharing that with each other, and that is part of what builds the social sinews, and that sense of connectedness. One scientist described it as the quintessential collective emotion, and I love that idea that it creates a greater sense of connectedness than even pride. And so having that sense of shared wonder with one another creates those sinews that are even more deeply tied than saying that you're proud to be a Googler.
And it brings me back, right? And because you talked about how over time with age, that's when we start to lose that sense of wonder. I'm so curious. All of this being said, how can we work on not internalizing some of this jadedness and being able to not just foster a feeling of wonder within ourselves, but cultivating that in an environment?
Yeah, so it is quite interesting because some of my background, I've always worked at at my company Hatch. Our motto basically is with better work comes a better world, and we believe that that if we create better work environments and better work experiences, then that has a cascade effect. So what's really fascinating is if we look at some of the environments that we've been in that are most compelling, they're already using this. So they're say you walk into a space, and I've been to a lot of the Google campuses, and I think you guys do an excellent job of this. You walk into a building, and first it's this huge vaulting space that has lots of natural light that gives you a sense of being small in a bigger space. Biophilia, any way that we can connect with nature, either inside the building or having a campus where you can experience it, is another way that we can have wonder at work, in work environments. Artwork is a great wonder bringer, and experiencing artwork on a personal level is another way that we and can tap into it, and bringing art into the physical built environment, very, very important. And so these are all just little techniques that we can use. I would say the key one, if you just wanted to find one thing, would certainly be biophilia. The research behind biophilia, which is having basically nature in the space, or design features that mimic nature. So that can be greenery, that can be water features, that can be anything that gives you a sense, even if it's not actually natural, that has sort of undulating patterns or tessellations or spirals, things that might remind you of clouds or of waves. Those sorts of things can be really, really effective for our brain. It goes back into our primal monkey brain that connects to nature, and really does help us feel closer to wonder.
Bringing it back to that sense of wonder that we can cultivate within ourselves, what are some tactical ways we can begin to pour into ourselves and into our communities?
Yeah, and so I think we've talked about some of the tactical ways that we can do ourselves. I think that the more that we're able to find shared experiences of wonder that are combined with sense of shared fellowship, and so this would be, for a lot of people, you might find it in religious practice. Although what we do know is that while religious practice is lessening with populations, spirituality is growing. And so I think sharing either a religious practice or a spiritual practice with others, that shared sense of fellowship, is very powerful. I talked about myself, music being a big element. When we go to musical performances with one another, that is becomes a shared communal event that really triggers our sense of shared wonder. And then hearing people speak in a shared environment. So I think really it's about finding those opportunities for connectedness in larger groups. It becomes almost like an amplifier for the single experience.
Monica, I can listen to you talk about this all day. And might I add, I think your second book should be a journal, because you've convinced me to open up my journal again and start writing these down as a
Oh,
commitment.
fabulous. That's great. Thank you, Sarah.
Absolutely. My final question for you before we break into Q&A, is just reading some of the reviews. Many have called The Power of Wonder an elixir for our post-pandemic world, which is so eloquently said. What do you hope that readers take away from this book?
You know what I hope, and in some ways, you can take this as a practical, or you can take this as a metaphysical. But what I want is that people to realize that there is more. There is more untapped, unseen. The way I describe it in the book is that it's almost like that voice you hear through the wall. You know it's there. You know there's something there. You can't quite make out the language, but you think, maybe if I just put like the cup up to the wall, I could hear what it is. There is more. There's so much more than we choose to see. We're just in autopilot almost all the time. And it's okay. Don't judge yourself. Don't chastise yourself for it. It's just how our brains work. But we really, if we could make a choice to consciously disconnect from the autopilot and to recognize that there's so much more untapped and unseen that we don't yet experience, and in that is such beauty, is such wonder, is such impact that we can have for ourselves and our communities. I think that's the primary thing I want people to take away, that there is more.
I love that. Thank you. And I'm sure our audience is equally as inspired as I am. But with that said, we can not break out, we can move on to Q&A. Let's see what our first question is. What was one of the most surprising things you discovered when doing your research?
Yeah, so I would say thank you for that, Lauren. I would say there's two things. The first was I talked about the physiological benefits. I mean, I knew that there was a spiritual piece that connected us. I knew that psychological, but I had no idea that the physiological impacts were so measurable. I mean, really, really discernibly positive. So I think that was the first thing. The other is the power of mixed emotions. I had never really given much thought to the fact that most of the emotions we experience are either positive or negative, right? So we have happiness, and happiness is always positive, and then we have fear, maybe, and that's always negative. But when we hold mixed emotions in our brains, like nostalgia, like gratitude, like curiosity, like awe, those are very positive for us, both physiologically and psychologically. So there's an interesting piece of research that was done that showed that widows and widowers, when they reflected through nostalgia on their partner after their death and remembered both the positive and the negative elements of that partner, that they were actually able to withstand their grief more effectively. And so I think that the power of mixed emotions and recognizing that we can hold two conflicting ideas in our brain at the same time, and that's actually really, really good for us. I think that was the thing that shocked me as well.
Wonderful. Let's see what our next question is. I feel like schools should bring in the sense of wonder and cultivate it so it continues to thrive and kids don't lose it as they grow into adults. What are your thoughts on this?
100%. And this is, I will make this a plug for the book. If this interests you, there is a whole chapter just on learning. Absolutely. There's so much evidence that wonder based learning helps children to learn more, but it also makes it a less competitive environment. It's just a natural function of how our brains learn, that if we use wonder, then it embeds that information in our long term memory more effectively. And even if we have to learn about something that we don't enjoy, but then sprinkle it with bits of wonder in between the stuff that we're really curious about, then we'll learn. They call it a curiosity vortex. So basically, it sucks in all other stuff we don't actually want to learn about, but just sort of comes along for the ride. I've used this technique with my stepson. He's not crazy about maths. We'll sprinkle it in with elements around Star Wars, and he ends up learning about both of them because he loves them both. And so I think it's really absolutely wonder-based education. I believe will enhance the experience of the teachers because it allows them to have more fun. I think it enhances the experience of the learner because it's also more fun, but they learn more. It sticks in their brain for longer. The challenge is that we have created systems that are so standardized. And if there was a way that we could move away from some of that standardization towards a more wonder based learning environment, I think that would be to everyone's benefit. So you're spot on about that.
Couldn't agree more. We have one more question. Thanks for joining us, Monica. What is one thing you want the reader to take away from your book?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, I think that just questioning what it is that we choose to see as we move through the world, and then challenging that and saying, what more can I see here? Especially in the quotidian. Don't be waiting for those big aha moments. Really just try to observe in your own life, where is the wonder here? And what is it that can make me feel like a smaller component part of a bigger system? And is that through other people? Is that through nature? Is that through something cognitive? But again, just always saying, where is the more? Where can I find more? And I hope that you all do find more and that you enjoy the book.
It's finding that stillness, that presence, and no better way than what you've already explained, finding that awe in everything that we do.
Thank you
So
so much, Sarah.
thank you so much, Monica, for your time today. It was such a pleasure speaking with you. Tell everyone where they can buy your book.
Yeah, absolutely. You can buy my book wherever books are sold. You can get them online, and you can find more about me, Wonder at Work, and the book itself at monica-parker.com. And I'm also on social at Monica C. Parker on Insta, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So I would love to connect with any of you guys and hear what you think about the book.
I love it. Please do reach out to her. You've heard it directly from her. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We will see you at the next talks at Google. Monica, thank you again. Have a great day.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Google.